I know most of you, many of you are getting familiar with this book, and just to let you know, not counting the day, there's 2 more weeks, so just a couple more weeks, and we've been going through the sermon series, sort of, say, based on this book. The book is called Greater by Steven Furtick, and I know some of you appreciate the sermon series. Great to hear that. Also heard some of you are hoping to maybe go out and buy the book, and maybe you have, and maybe read through it. Recommend it. It's a good book, easy to read through, and hopefully get a lot out of it. If you weren't here for some of the sermons, we actually are starting to put them online. His are online, based on the sermon series too. His are probably better than, well, I shouldn't say probably. His are better than mine, so you can look up his. Or you can go to YouTube and type in Fetterhoff Chapel or my name, and you can see what we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks as well. But we've been in the sermon series entitled Greater. The whole idea for this sermon series, comes from Jesus. It says, if we are to follow him, we are going to do greater things than he has done. And so how do we live out? How do we live a greater life? Small print says here, dream bigger, start smaller, ignite God's vision for your life. Whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, no matter what you believe, I think at the end of your life, when you look back, you want to be able to say, or hope that you can be able to say, I lived a life of significance. I lived a life of meaning. I lived a life of purpose. And that's really what we're getting at, this idea of greater, to live a greater life. We believe as Christians that through Jesus, we have this opportunity to live a life of meaning, live a life of purpose. As we've been defining what greater means, we've been saying a greater life is a life lived with God, in relationship with God. So we have this opportunity to live a greater life. Now maybe you've been wrestling with this, and we won't have time this morning to go over every place that we've been, but maybe you're wrestling with this idea of greater, and we hear this idea of great, and you're wrestling this, maybe you think you should hear it, that, who am I to live a great life? Who am I to live a great life? Isn't that even somewhat contradictory? As Christians, aren't we to have humility? Aren't we to humble? I mean, who am I to say that look at my life, it's great? So there can be some tension in that. If we seek to live a greater life, if we seek to do great things, are we just doing them for ourselves? Is pride going to creep in? Is pride going to creep in? And actually we're going to see this morning, if we're living a greater life, the greater life that we're talking about, the more greater that your life, or the greater your life is becoming, the less about you it is. The less about you, the more about God. And actually what we're going to see this morning is that actually it's not so much that you have to worry about pride creeping in, but you have to worry that pride is going to get in the way, that you are going to get in the way of you living a greater life. And we'll see that here this morning. A wonderful story. I love this story out of Scripture we'll get to just in a minute. But pride is one of those things. Us getting in the way of ourselves is one of those things that sometimes we can't see. A lot of times we need someone to, pride is always somebody else's problem. Well, you should hear them talk about themselves. They're rather boastful, don't you think? It's always somebody else that's never sort of turn around and say, well, I'm sort of boasting in that, or I'm looking at what I've done. Say, well, they got a sort of an issue. They have a lot of things going on, and they like to make sure everybody knows it. It's hard to turn pride inward and say that I have the issue, that it's my problem. Some things we just can't see on our own, and we need other people to help us. I didn't get my mom's permission to share this story, so I'll make her nervous right away. I think it's amusing. But there's a time in life, and this is not, pun intended now. I said the pun accidentally over Mount Eden this morning, but this is not a heavy, weighty example. And but I wanted to share this with you. There was something that I didn't see happening in my life, and my mom, I think, at least the way that I remember the story, she helped me be aware of what was going on. And it's not, a heavy thing. It's not but anyway, whenever I was, and you'll see quickly where this is going. Whenever I was in high school, weighed a certain amount. But whenever I graduated, they always talked about the freshman 15 in college. And I didn't put the freshman 15 on, but it took me 4 years of college, and I ended up with, an additional 10 upon graduation. And that was fine. My mom should have stepped in right there, all right? Okay, but it took a while. Whenever I first got my office job, and I was working behind the desk, there was a Turkey Hill that we could just walk up around. And in those days, the gas was still 98 cents. See, I'm older than some of you thought I was. See, gas is 98 cents. They still can get gas for around $1. But you walked up around, and this Turkey Hill actually had 99-cent half-gallon iced teas. And Turkey Hill iced tea is pretty good, especially the raspberry. The raspberry iced tea. I found the raspberry iced tea my first year after graduating college, working behind the desk, working behind the computer. I might walk, but it was just a walk to Turkey Hill to maybe get a half-gallon of iced tea. And I consumed a lot, and a lot. And I was living by myself, cooking for myself, and it wasn't always the best. And the way that after my first year out of college, as I can do the math, I think I put 30 pounds on. And from 1 year, I think, after college, and I joke and I tell the story this way. You got something going on when your mother gives you a scale for Christmas. All right? Now, she might have a different version of that story. She might have a different version, but that's how I like to tell. It's more funny that way, and that's sort of how I recall it. And like I said, if I would have gotten that at the beginning, I would have drifted. I didn't see it. I did not see it. I didn't notice it. I didn't, even think. I never had to think about it in my life until then. But before it was, eventually it got too late, and I worked most of, well, I shouldn't say most of it, but a little bit of it off. And but anyway, I didn't see it. And pride can be that way. We can get in our own way. We can't see it. We need other people to speak in. And pride can get in the way of our life, in the way of living a greater life, living a life for God. And we see that in the story this morning. We're looking at 2 Kings chapter 5. It probably is one of my favorite ones in the Bible. It's I find it sort of amusing. Because you got this character that we're introduced to, Naaman. And Naaman says here right away, 2 Kings chapter 1. Go over just a little bit with you. It says, Naaman, a general from the king of Aram, was a great man and highly regarded by his master, because through him the Lord had given victory. This was a mighty warrior. When we think of Naaman, think of the sort of, I was doing a comparison to celebrities and politicians, a great, a notable person. A notable person, if anyone would ask, do you know who Naaman, is? Then you would know who Naaman is and was. And you would know Naaman. Naaman was a notable guy. He was well known, and he was a great general, a great warrior. And as you can see this play out, that makes a role here in the story. But Naaman, he had a skin disease. Commonly thought of as being leprosy. And leprosy is very painful, very tragic. It created a lot of tension within the society and culture too, because leprosy was a scary disease, and they were shunned a lot of times, especially in certain countries. And so Naaman had this great skin disease that was causing a lot of problems. And as you can see in verse 3, it says, verse 2 says, a young girl from the land of Israel, she was serving Naaman's wife. And verse 3 says, she said to her mistress, I wish that my master could come before the prophet who lives in Samaria. He would cure him of his skin disease. So Naaman went and told his master what the young girl from the land of Israel had said. So Aram's king said, go ahead. All right, go ahead. Tells Naaman, go ahead, go over there to Israel. You can talk to them and seek healing for your skin disease. So he goes. Naaman prepares it. He takes this gift. He takes this gift with him to offer to them as thanks. But we heard a lot of starting verse 7. Naaman goes, he offers all this, he goes to Israel's king, and he says, I want to come here, I want to be healed. Now, Israel's king gets nervous. He gets nervous. He thinks this is some sort of trick, like if I heal him, great, everything will be fine, but if I don't heal him, then, they're just going to come and, destroy us, or, he was nervous. We hear a lot of references to ripping clothes, and, in our mind, if we're not familiar with this passage, you might think that he got a letter, and on his way to opening this letter, he got too close to the desk, and he ripped his clothes. That's not what he's talking about. Ripping the clothes here meant that he was in great grief. He was in great distress. He was upset because he didn't think he could help. Israel's king thought he was in a jam. He thought he couldn't help the situation. Now, Elijah finds out, Elijah, the man of God, finds out what is going on and says, I can help. Now, remember, Naaman, this great man, he was a great man, great individual, and, basically, if you've heard of him, you think of celebrities and politicians, it's like sometimes you hear stories where it almost sounds like it's like they're offended if you don't know who they are. You ever hear, stories and examples of that? Great, celebrities and politicians where, they might walk away and say, well, don't you know who I am? You get that sense that this is Naaman. Because, and that's an important part here. Because in verse 9 it says, Naaman arrived, he's now going to Elisha for healing. It says, when Naaman arrived with his horses and chariots, he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Now in verse 10, Elijah sent out a messenger. Okay, so Naaman goes to visit Elisha, and Elisha doesn't even go out to greet him. So you have this Naaman, great man, like who do you know who I am? And Elijah, when he comes, that seems rather rude. What's going on here? Elijah doesn't even come out to greet him. Instead, he sends a messenger out. He knows why Naaman is there. And the messenger tells Naaman, go and wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and become clean. Right? Naaman, he wants to get clean, he wants to be healed, and he goes. He doesn't even see Elijah. Elijah sends out a messenger and tells him, just, go clean the Jordan River. Now, to that, Naaman gets upset. Don't you know who I am? I mean, I'm, this great warrior. I'm Naaman. Don't you know? And you're telling you're sending out a messenger. I mean, what's going on here? And he goes away. It says, went away in anger. And verse 11 says, I thought for sure that he'd come out, stand and call in the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the bad spot and cure the skin disease. And he says, well, aren't there better rivers, back home? I mean, I got to go into Jordan. I mean, that's dirty compared to some of the other waters and rivers that I know. And, I mean, there's better rivers. I just got to go and take a bath, and there's other places I can go. He was upset. Naaman's expectations were broken. He thought he would go and there'd be some grand, something grand, because of who he is and this grand healing. But his expectations were broken. He was upset. And he goes away, as it says in verse 12. It says, he turned away and proceeded to leave in anger. He doesn't go take the dip. He doesn't go for the healing. It was offered to him. It was right there. Didn't meet his expectation. Who's getting in the way of Naaman's healing? Naaman. He's getting in the way of living his life out. He's getting in the way of his healing. It's who he thinks he is. It's, his pride is getting in the way of him, of his healing. Now, fortunately for Naaman, he has individuals looking at him and are able to speak into what is going on into his life. Now, Lefty, I started at the cliffhanger. I'll read verses 13 and 14. It says, Naaman's servants came up to him and spoke to him. It says, our father, and then they get to the point of the issue. It says, our father, if the prophet had told you to do something difficult, sort of like those movies, where it's like you need a cure, but it's like that little feather in the top of the distant mountain that you got to go across, a couple of gorges and stuff. If Elijah came out and told Naaman to go and do something great like that, and Naaman, would have walked away from that and say, oh yeah, that is great, that is wonderful, I can do that. Nobody else can do that except me. That I can do. But Elijah tells him, just go take a dip in the river. I mean, anybody can do that, right? So Naaman's servants are calling Naaman out and says, our father, if the prophet had told you to do something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? But all he said to you was wash and become clean. So Naaman went down and bathed in the Jordan 7 times, just like the man of God had said. The skin was restored like that of a young boy, and he became clean. Fortunately for Naaman, he had other individuals to speak into his life. Naaman was getting in the way of himself receiving healing. He was getting in the way of his pride, who he thought he was, the importance that he thought. He was getting in the way of himself, living a greater life, if you will, receiving the healing that Elisha was calling him. The question for us to wrestle with this morning is, how are we getting in our own way? Sooner or later, you're walking with God, long enough, he's going to call us to deal with this, of who we think we are, of our pride in our lives. He's going to call us to do something that we're going to come away and say, that's beneath me. Or that seems to be too simple. Or, we have the conversation in our head and say, God, I would do anything except. And we can stand in our way of our own healing. We can stand in the way of our own forgiveness. We can stand in the way of our greater life. Our pride of who we think we are. We might think that we shouldn't have to do whatever he calls us to do. And we shouldn't have this conversation in our head. It's like, God, why are you making me face this that I don't want to face? Are you punishing me? Say, no, he's not seeking to punish us, but he's seeking to draw us out where we need our most healing, where we need to be confronted, where we need to see him, where we need to fully rely on him at. Because we can't do it on our own. We can't do it on our own. See, we are all like Naaman. We need the healing in our life, and we need God to come and heal us. We are separated from God. God is holy. God is righteous. We are not. We need healing in our life. Because we can't live the life that God calls us to live. We can't seek to live a greater life to serve God and love God without God healing us through Jesus Christ, making us whole. That's what we need in our life. I thought, a couple of examples of Mother's Day makes a wonderful example for this. This idea of serving and loving and thinking, if anyone had the right to think a lot of themselves, and they should, mothers, right? First, we see this in Jesus, too. All right? We'll get some, credit. We'll compare mothers to Jesus. We can do that quite effectively. Jesus, the story in John 13. Jesus was there in John 13, and let me just turn it, if I can find it. In John chapter 13, Jesus was there, and he was, it says here in verse 3, John 13, verse 3, says, Jesus knew the Father had given everything into his hands, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. Jesus knows that he's God. He knows that everything, around him, because he was involved in all of creation, is his. Is his. I mean, anybody that says, deserves to be noted as being great, and that anything beyond that is beneath him, is who? It's Jesus. But what does he do next? He understands that he is God. He understands that everything, he is in everything, involved in everything, created everything. Everything is beneath him, literally. Literally. But yet, it says in verse 4, he got up from the table and took off his robes. Picking up a linen towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a washpan and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he was wearing. The one that, quite literally, everything was beneath him, chose to serve, chose to love, ultimately would choose to sacrificially give his life, his death for you and I. That's our example. And I was bringing up mothers, I think they make a wonderful example for many of us today as well. If anyone's going to hold that card of, I'm mom, and you guys should gratefully do this, and sometimes you jokingly do this, it's like, why do I need to do anything for you? I gave birth to you, right? You have those conversations. You know the pain and labor that I went through, and I'm not speaking for myself. I didn't go through any of that disclaimer, right? It's all over there, right? But that conversation, if anybody had the right to say that, it's moms, right? The pain that I went through, that I've gone through, the nights that I've stayed up worrying, or the nights that I've been up dealing with you when you're sick or in distress and anxiety. But yet, they have the right to say, you know who I am? But moms don't do that. They love, they serve, they give sacrificially because they're moms. Because they're moms. See, we can get in the way. We can think too much of ourselves. Our pride, who we think we are, can get in the way of us living a greater life. See, the more that we live and seek to live a greater life, the more you're going to realize it's not about you. It's not about you, it's about God. And he's going to call you to do something, to say something that you might think is going to be beneath you. But who do you think you are? We have to know who we are, that we are in Christ. See, the story, this morning, I don't want you to think that you just need to try hard, you just got to give more. The point of the story this morning is we're like Naaman, we are sick. We can't be healed on our own. Only through the blood of Christ. Our only hope, our only newness of the only way that we can possibly give and live the way that we want to. And I believe this for Christians and non-Christians alike, that for those that want to give and live sacrificially, to want to love unselfishly, the only way to be able to do that is through Christ. He was our example. He gave. He could have said, everything is beneath him, but he gave all. For us to live and to give in that way, we need to be healed too, to be made righteous, to be a habit of created in us a new heart, so that we can love the way he wants us to love and serve the way he wants us to serve, because it's not natural for us to do that. But through the power of Christ living in and through us, we can. We can be healed. So receive the healing today. Push pride out of the way, not because of what you have done, but because of the power of Christ in you. And receive that healing. Let us pray.